In this video, we'll learn how do you create a virtual machine using the Azure portal. At this time, I'm logged into the Azure portal with my subscription, which is there. You can see on the top right hand side, Keep Learning Cloud at hotmail.com is my user ID that I've used, and the subscription is pay as you go. When you want to do a similar lab like this, you may need to have your own subscription. You can create your own free subscription, and I'm going to show that to you in the subsequent videos. At this time, let's just learn how to create a virtual machine. Now on the left hand side, you see list of Azure services that it provides as on today. And we want to create a virtual machine, so I will click on the virtual machine section and then click on create virtual machine. You can either click on this blue button or click on this plus icon. That's the same thing. Now what it's going to open now is a wizard that will show us a couple of options that we need to fill up. For example, selecting the subscription, the resource group, virtual machine, etc. So we have to follow this wizard. Microsoft is known to make things easy by giving us a wizard way of installing something, a wizard method of provisioning something. In this case, it's a virtual machine. The first thing that we have to do is select subscription. So if you create your account for the first time, this will not be pay as you go. This will be a free tier account. I will be creating a new resource group. In one of the videos earlier, we learned about what a resource group is. Resource group is a collection of resources so that you can later on charge the business unit back, or maybe apply certain policies, do certain troubleshooting on that resource group. In the previous example, we said that the resource group name is human resources, so you can apply policies and then bill, charge back the HR business unit. In this case, I'm going to create a new resource group because I do not have one. So let's name the new resource group as payroll and say okay. Now what's your name of the virtual machine? Always follow certain standards for creating a virtual machine, and you may have to ask the business unit what their standards are. Now let's name the virtual machine as VM Web 01. There are certain naming standards that Azure itself has. If you look on the right hand side, it says that the resource name cannot contain special characters. Virtual machine name must be unique in the current resource group. The value is in between 1 to 64 character long, and all characters are valid for Linux OS. Looks like I'm compliant. So moving next. Do you remember the picture that I was showing about the world map where we had the Azure data centers? Now as you see here in this picture, the Azure data centers are available everywhere. That's what the next option is about. Where do you want to create this virtual machine? Now all those blue dots that you saw on the map is what these lists mean. So you can select one of these geographical regions. So the best practice is to choose a virtual machine that is closest to the user, right? So let's go ahead and select East US. In this case, I have this habit of selecting East US. Availability options, remember what availability options were. So if you want to make sure that your virtual machine does not get impacted by any natural disasters, man-made issues, or could be patching, updating the firmware on the machine, things like that, so you may want to choose an availability option to make sure that it's available at all times. But in this case, it's just a test environment, so I'll leave the availability option at this time. The next option is image. What kind of operating system are you looking for? Do you want a Windows, or are you looking for a SUSE, CentOS, Red Hat? You got all of these options. I'm going to select a 2012 R2 data center. The next option is how much of compute power, the size that you want to give to this machine. You got different permutations and combinations, so I'm going to click on change size. Then you will see different combinations available. So this one is D4SV3, which is giving me 4 CPUs and 16 gigs of memory. Although you can choose anything, but I will stick to this, which is giving me 1 CPU and 3.5 gigs of memory. So that's fair enough. I don't need more than that for the lab. Administrator account. Make sure that you choose, or rather say do not choose a regular name like administrator or root, because Microsoft does not accept it. Let's give it a shot. Administrator. So say usernames must not include reserved words. Even usernames like root are not accepted because these are reserved words. So I'm going to choose root admin. Okay. The password, make sure that it is complex and fits the compliance rules as well. So yeah, password is matching. Make sure that it's long enough, it's complex, it has special characters, uppercase, lowercase, to make sure that the unethical people out there on the internet do not guess it so quickly with their tools. Now, this virtual machine is being created somewhere out on the internet, somewhere in Azure in one of the data centers, which we selected East US right here. So this is a Windows-based virtual machines, and I must be allowing certain inbound ports for us to access it from my network in this case. So I want to allow port number 3389 so that I can RDP to this machine. What's the point of creating a virtual machine in Azure if I cannot access it? So if I want to access it, I need two things. One is an inbound connection allowed on RDP because it's a Windows machine. If I would have selected a Linux machine, I would select SSH. Yeah. Now I also have the username and password. So once this machine is ready, I'm ready to RDP. RDP is remote desktop protocol, which will let us connect to the machine over remote networks. Okay. So in the next section, we can select the disks. How much of hard disk size do you want? And whether you want a premium SSD, a standard SSD, or a standard HDD. The differences between these will be IOPS, or input output per second, the performance that will be directly related to these options. Premium SSD is used for mission critical workloads that are production sensitive. Now, because this is just a test environment, I'm going to choose standard HDD. Other option here is to create and attach a new disk. So this one is just going to create a C drive, but I can have multiple disks attached to it, which will be D, E, and F drives subsequently. Clicking on next, it gives me the option to select the virtual network. Now, every time you see new in brackets, that means it is creating a virtual network for you. We have not created a virtual network so far. So hence it is creating a virtual network for me, because in my subscription, I do not have a virtual network in East US. So it's going to automatically create a virtual network. But in the subsequent videos, when we talk about virtual networks specifically, I will tell you how to create a virtual network. So it creates a virtual network, a subnet, and is also assigning a public IP to me. Well, I have the option not to do so. So if I do not have a public IP to the virtual machine, I will not be able to access it or DP to it from the internet. Okay, so hence I will have a new public IP assigned to this. Do you want this virtual machine in a security group? A security group is nothing but a firewall. A firewall will have set of rules that will allow or deny incoming or outgoing connections. In this case, I've selected inbound ports to be allowed for RDP. That means this security group or the firewall will have an ACL written or a rule written allowing me to RDP to this virtual machine. Next, do you want to have accelerated networking that will increase the Ethernet speed so that people can do transactions faster at a networking level? Now, because this is a small size machine, it says the VM does not support accelerated networking. Do you want to have virtual machines behind a load balancer? Now, at this time I will say no, because we haven't touched upon the subject of load balancer, so we'll park it for later discussion. Next is management section, where it talks about where you want to store the boot diagnostics or OS guest diagnostics. So just in case this virtual machine ever falls in trouble or a problem, how would you like to troubleshoot that? Well, for troubleshooting purposes, you will need logs. Those logs are boot diagnostics and OS guest diagnostics. Boot diagnostics are storing logs specifically for operating system boot operations, whereas anything in the application or operating system behaviors will be logged in OS guest diagnostics. Now, both of these are going and sitting inside a separate storage account called as payroll diag 555. Now, again, we haven't spoken about storage account yet. When we talk about storage accounts, you will be able to join these dots. But at this time, please remember that both boot diagnostics and OS guest diagnostics are logged inside a storage account called as payroll diag 555. Consider that as just a storage account, just like your hard disk. Identity section. This is whether you want to join it to your Azure Active Directory or not. Just like the way you join your on-premise system to on-premise Active Directories, here by selecting identity, I'm saying that your system, which is this virtual machine, will be joined to Azure Active Directory. Do you want this machine to be automatically shut down? If yes, then you select on and then select the time along with time zone. Do you want someone to get notified before it shuts down? Well, you then go ahead and put the email address here. Okay, let's just select off here. Now the last option here is, do you want to enable backups, on or off? If you select on, then a new service called as Azure Site Recovery or Recovery Services Vault will be enabled. So all the backups will then go inside that vault. This is good for disaster recovery purposes, right? At this time, I'll select off and then click on the next section, which is adding extensions. Extensions are a way to install clients on the virtual machine or antivirus or anything that will supplement the virtual machine's behavior. On the on-premise infrastructure, remember that we had to install several components like a monitoring agent or an antivirus agent, things like that. So those are nothing but extensions. So I can select an extension to install, and there are a lot of default extensions in this menu. So I can check what I want. For example, if I select an antivirus, I'm just looking for Microsoft antivirus in this case. That's the Microsoft anti-malware. I can just say that. Let's click on it and say create, and just leave these options as default and say okay. Now during the virtual machine provisioning process, this anti-malware will be installed on the machine. So the installation of anti-malware in this case just goes hands-free. I don't have to do anything, right? So that's what extensions mean. The other options, Cloud Init. This is an approach where you can customize Linux virtual machines, but in this case I really do not have a Linux machine, it's a Windows machine, and that's why this informational message says that the selected image does not support Cloud Init, which makes sense because it is only for Linux virtual machines, right? The other option here is VM generation, whether you want a Gen 1 virtual machine or a generation 2 virtual machine. Now generation 2 virtual machines are considered to be more secure because it's got UEFI based boot architecture. They can support increased memory, operating system disk size limits are higher. So generation 2 virtual machines are very good at providing enhanced security as well as better speed and performance. Now I'll click on next to add some tags. Tags are only for charging purposes and bill back, so that people know who owns this virtual machine or which department does this virtual machine belong to. So in this case, so we can just write like that: name equals web server, owner equals Rob, or application owner equals Steve, and backup team is maybe Mary, and the business unit is payroll. So after creating like tons of virtual machines and different kinds of resources, you can definitely pull up a report and say how many of these virtual machines belong to an owner called Rob, and how many of these resources belong to business unit called payroll, so you can then charge them back. Now I click on next, and this will take a minute to run through the validation just to check if everything is running properly or not. And yeah, validation is passed. Now that's a green signal. Let's just click on create. This will take about 4 to 7 minutes to create a virtual machine. That is the shortest time possible to create a virtual machine, because on premise it used to take months to procure, provision, go through the processes, get the financial approvals to create a virtual machine, or even a physical machine for that matter. But here it's so quick. Now apart from processes, technically creating a virtual machine does not take more than 4 to 7 minutes in this case. You'll be able to RDP once the machine is created. In the next video, I'm going to show you how will you RDP to this virtual machine or remotely connect to this virtual machine.